Okay, now recording. Let me share with you, in case you've missed it. We now have a getting started guide. If you haven't had the chance to have a look at it, I recommend coming here and criticizing really hard in case you don't like something or you see something missing or something that can be improved. Okay, but basically. Or the whole idea of this getting started guide isn't to document everything in API, but just to help people get started. This is a getting started guide, right? But not just on AsyncAPI. For instance, something that I've seen over time is that not many people really know so much about event-driven architectures. And so I wrote a blog post and this piece of documentation in case you want to learn the basic concepts of event-driven, really basic concepts, right? And that's the idea that to teach people, let's say, about event-driven architectures, and from there take them to what's the value of AsyncAPI if you're doing event-driven, right? One might think, okay, if you don't know so much what event-driven is or event-driven architectures is, then you don't need AsyncAPI, right? What do you want AsyncAPI for? Well, what I found in the last years is that many people are using AsyncAPI or looking for something like AsyncAPI because it's the first time they're doing event-driven microservices or event-driven architectures. So it's a good way for them to learn as well, to learn how AsyncAPI works, because that will allow them to have better documentation and all of that, right? And a better getting started experience, right? So from here, there are two big buttons here to see how it compares with OpenAPI. And if I really recommend having a look at this chart, the OpenAPI AsyncAPI comparison, because I think it really describes really good. This idea was taken from Darrell Miller post on OpenAPI on how they compare Swagger 2 versus OpenAPI 3, and I really liked the idea, and it was like, okay, let's do it for AsyncAPI, and I was planning, but I kept it simple for now. I was planning on making it interactive, at least the AsyncAPI part, right? That would be amazing. I didn't do it yet, but this is HTML. This is not an image, as you can see. I can select the text here. So that would be amazing to make something like this, something that people can navigate, and probably on the right side to have an AsyncAPI file, right? And it will highlight the different parts of the file, right? So you can have a better understanding of the different parts of AsyncAPI. And something here, in case that you know about OpenAPI, you don't need to know about the basics of AsyncAPI documents, let's say, because they are just the same. So that's why it was jumping to Hello World directly. But yeah, so here there's also the minimum you need to know in order to create an AsyncAPI document, right? Anyway, summarizing, have a look at it whenever you have time. Have a read, or I don't know how to say it in English, but diagonal read, or reading diagonal, right? So if you can propose some improvements, I will be glad. What else? Apart from this, I've been working on on something really exciting during the last week, and it's upgrading the documentation generator to support version 2. So now, for those that don't have so much context, the documentation generator is what it's shown here on the right side. This only supports 1.x AsyncAPI version, and now we're working on supporting version 2. So I've been working on redesigning everything as well. Like, let's get a better look for the documentation, because this amount of tables, useless tables here, it was very, very difficult, or very ugly, difficult to read documentation. Like, you can see most of the fields are empty, and it's always going to be like that, because sometimes you don't need to specify many of these fields, right? So as you can see, most of the times the tables are half empty. So we changed it to let's say labeling approach, like this, like enum, and yeah, and now we have these three columns. These three columns design with examples on the right, and yeah, and expandable and collapsible, and I think this is the way to go, right? It is responsive, so in case you don't have space for the three columns, you see the examples below, and yeah, and you don't see the menu. This is something I'm working on now on showing the menu with the button, right? And yeah, pretty much it. From my side, I've been just mostly working on that. And yeah, probably, Rubén, can you share your screen?
Oh, no, I can't share.
Sorry. No, you can't? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I can explain a little bit.
Right? Okay.
Yeah, so we've been working in the parser, and we needed to be able to resolve the refs in a JSON schema. So right now we have a working version that is able to resolve reference in the same file, in an external file, and in a URL. So it will resolve the reference and substitute for the proper value. And we just finish a way to detect if there is a circular reference, and if there's a circular reference, you have an option that by default is set to true, that will change that reference by a mock or not very useful object, let's say, with a key, and the key equals to circular and the value equals to circular, and you can set the option to false, and then you will get an error message saying which reference has a circular reference. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, I probably can put some context here. So when you have an AsyncAPI file, sometimes you see these $ref properties, which are references to other pieces of the same file, or different file in your system, or in a URL, right? There wasn't anything on the Go ecosystem to resolve this, to go and get the the external reference and merge it into the document. So Rubén has been working on that, on doing that. So right now it means that we can have the same features that we had in Node.js, but we can now compile the parser, because it's in Go. We compile it to C, and we can use it in any language. Actually, the documentation generator that I just showed is using the parser Rubén created in Go, and the generator is in Node.js. So this is just to demo how we can interoperate between Node.js and Go, which is actually through a C library, right? Compiling Go to C library and using it in Node.js. It means that now we have, let's say, 80%. I'm just inventing the number here, but I think it's close to it. Let's say 18% fully feature or fully complete, 80% complete parser for version 2. It's actually missing very few things. And it means that we can use the parser, the official parser, in every language we want.
What about different platforms, though?
Sorry, say again.
What about different platforms? Don't you have to compile it to each, architecture that you're going to run on?
Yeah. So one of the things that we did in the last 2 weeks as well is to prepare Travis CI to compile the parser for 3 different platforms, for Linux, Mac, and Windows. All of them has to be x64 architecture. We're not supporting x32 yet. It should be really easy. Actually, we can't support x32 bits architecture because for a very stupid reason that we embedded the whole AsyncAPI document, the JSON schema document, inside the code for now. Right, so it's a really big string that doesn't fit in 32-bit architectures. So I mean, it's just a matter of extracting it to a file, and that will work.
Yeah, I'm guessing there's probably not too much demand for 32-bit architectures anymore.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, we have Internet of Things as well. We have to target these small sensors that may run on all architectures. But yeah, I mean, in any case, it's not a priority for now. We will work on that later on. Yeah, so summarizing, we are now, let's say, in the middle of having a fully featured environment or editor, right? Like the one we have for version 1 now, but for version 2. And aside from that, we got a lot of fixes for version 2 as well. Nothing major, just most of them just changes in the documentation, in the Markdown documentation, and changes in the JSON schema definition of AsyncAPI. So nothing really major, and it's progressing well. I mean, Michael, you know that what's missing because you're working on something on fixing this Markdown documentation for the spec, and I mean, you can if you want, you can share this what you're doing. I think it's better.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was tackling a couple of issues, like small issues that were put on GitHub, but that's sort of making me dig into understanding the spec. And so, like, for example, one of the issues mentioned that, the operations object isn't really well documented. And I started to look at that, and then, I'm starting to come up with some questions. So that's actually something I was going to ask before I add more documentation. I need to understand the spec better. And if I have a bunch of questions, what's the best place to ask them, like on Slack, or should I attach them to the relevant issues in GitHub or whatever? I mean, some of these are kind of small questions that probably don't need a permanent record, of the question being asked, but maybe other ones would be helpful to keep around. I don't know. Here's an example. I got like one thing, channels, right? Like is a topic a channel? Is a queue a channel? If a topic is a channel, like there's a lot of applications where you could send messages to different topics depending on the message. Like, for example, think of like stock quotes or something like that, where the quote symbol is part of the topic. I suppose, it would make sense in that case to define like a grouping of topics with maybe a common root as a channel, with replaceable elements and so on. So, I think those kinds of questions need to be, well, I have questions like that. So,
yeah, so I think that's a good example of a question I've already talked to Fran about, which, okay, so now there's two of us asking the same question, which probably means we need to document the answer to the question, right? So good catch. But yeah, to answer your question, it's a channel, I think, with the parameter concept, right? So you've got to kind of put the two together, so you can kind of have a regular, runtime regular expression substitution for, to your point, what the actual like stock ticker name, would be. So.
Yeah, actually, so regarding what you said, Michael, and it's very related to what Jonathan was saying, a conversation that we had. To answer simply, a topic is a channel, and a queue is a channel. Both are channels. So a channel is just where you send information to communicate to the other side, right? That can be confusing sometimes in case you have both. If you have a channel, if you have a queue and a topic, like in RabbitMQ, for instance, you can have both, right? It can be a little bit confusing. That's why we introduced this protocol info objects, which are for protocol-specific definitions, right? So in this case, you could have the channel. I'm just inventing one of the solutions. Is the channel could be the topic, and then you have a protocol info object describing that to reach that topic, you should connect to this queue, with a queue with this name, or a queue with this name pattern, or something like this. But some people will not need, or sometimes you don't need a topic. Like you only connect to queues, and let's say, for instance, you have the worker pattern. If you have the worker pattern, you don't need topics. So just publish in the queue, and you get other consumers to subscribe to the same queue, right? In this case, a channel can be the queue name. Same thing, because we have parameters in the channel. We can define parts that may change, like your name may be composed of a series of variable parts for the name, right? And other static parts. So yeah, I think I will say we should play more with this kind of examples for version 2 before we launch it. There's plenty of time before we launch it, but I think we should play more with that and test how it fits. But my guess is that most of these definitions or specific things about how you want to make it work are going to be put in protocol info objects. Because if you think about it, we cannot provide, probably, I didn't investigate enough with that, but most probably you cannot put this kind of information, if it's a queue or if it's a topic, in the general spec, let's say, in the spec, because if you put it there, it doesn't make sense at all for other systems, right? I think APIs will be protocol agnostic, right? It's me, Jonathan, I'm calling you.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I know. Well, it gets tricky because on the one hand, you want to keep it protocol agnostic, but on the other hand, in order to do useful code generation and stuff, you need a bit more detail. And I think that's where the spec extensions could come in.
Exactly.
So, I mean, like remember hearing that at Solus we have, clients who were a client who, getting back to the stock market example, when they're generating ticker prices, they'll publish to topics, but then they'll split those topics into several queues. It's like all the stocks starting with A, all the stocks starting with B, and so on. Is a kind of a way to, to do like shock absorption on the part of the subscribers so that they, can keep up, and a way of handling very large volumes. So it would be kind of tricky to represent that, because on the one hand we say, well, a channel is the topics where you're publishing to, but on the other hand we end up with 30 different queues that are being subscribed to, and so you say, well, there's 31 channels, or how do you represent that? Maybe you don't want to represent it at that level in the spec. Maybe that's a kind of an implementation detail, but I'm just kind of thinking aloud about how much detail do you need about the implementation, and what are you trying to represent?
I think we should be able to represent that information in the document, probably not in the spec. I mean, I'm separating spec from specification extensions. Like, extensions are not part of the spec, or content, the content of the extensions, right? The spec allows you to inject extensions. That's the only thing. What's inside these extensions, it's not part of the spec. So probably, and one of the things that I use for my examples on the examples that you can find on the repo, it's actually there was an object. I think it was for AsyncAPI. There was a protocol info extension which was for AsyncAPI, and it had a field called is Q true, right? Like, and you add it to the channel object. Like, okay, this is a channel, right? But then we added that for AsyncAPI, we want to understand that this is a queue. This is not a topic, right? Or I don't know. It's a topic, true or false, whatever. I think this is the way we should go. So we can have this information there, and we can represent complex setups and for different protocols and products, without compromising too much the specification. That's why I'm worried about. Many times people tell me, hey, why don't you have support for this in the spec? And it's like, wait, if we do that, what about these other protocols, right? Or other products? It doesn't make sense. And that's why I wanted to separate it to the protocol extensions, to the protocol info extensions. So, but yeah, I think the best way will probably be to create an example, sufficiently complex example, and then try to generate code from there, and see how it works, and see where we're losing something, right, and where we're gaining something, right? Or but yeah, most probably I think that this is the way to go. So something that I've been thinking lately, and this is not decided yet, but just changing the subject a little bit, more or less, is that we should probably defer the announcement of the announcement of version 2, or the release of version 2, not the announcement, but the release, right, of the definitive version, to September. Why I'm saying so, it's because we need to cover all these cases before we say this is mature enough, or this is well tested to understand that this is something good for the next years, because my understanding is that the version 2 of the spec is going to be out for many years. It's probably going to be out as the latest stable version. I mean, aside from 2 point something, right? But major version 2, I think it's going to be out for many years, and I think it's going to be the latest version, major version. So we should make sure that it covers all these cases, or at least gives you an option, even if it's not the most beautiful thing, at least gives you an option through extensions to do this or that, right? Or if something is missing, it's something that it's not a breaking change, so we can be sure that we're not ruining user experience launching version 3 after after 2 months. We launch version 2, right? So yeah, that's why I was thinking on deferring the announcement of version 2. It doesn't mean we will not announce it. By the way, Jonathan, it doesn't mean that we will not announce it on Gartner AABI event in London. We're gonna announce it, but we're gonna announce that this is a release candidate. We have a release candidate, and as such, it's not definitive. But yeah, I think. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I'm good with that, and yeah, I think saying it's a release candidate's fine. The trick, as you know, is getting the word out so that people actually test it, use it as a release candidate, and then not being sort of stuck in concrete that we release 2.0 and we don't want to make large changes, right? So it's a balancing act. I'm fine with sort of holding off on officially calling 2.0.0 done and just keeping it in a release candidate, for longer. I think that's fine. It still accomplishes the marketing goals that I think we have.
Yeah, I think it's just the idea of launching it or releasing or announcing during the Gartner event was mostly because of getting the word out, right? Not so much about technical reason, right? Cool. I'm happy to hear that you agree with that. So I'm not hearing from Andrew. It's your first time. You may want to say something, introduce yourself.
I'm Andrew Snodgrass. I work for TIBCO. I work on the Micro Gateway project and the Mastery of Local product. So that's me.
Nice. Welcome.
Hey, Fran, this is Raji. Just for context, Andy is one of our key guys on the Flogo project, right? He's been making contributions on that. Yeah, we wanted to start getting plugged in more regularly on this call. So you'll see more of us every week.
Nice. Good to know. And welcome back, Raji. It's been a long time we don't see you here.
I know, just been busy with customer travel, events, and so forth. Yeah.
Cool. And I think okay, yeah. I'm looking at how many people we have here, and you know who you are, Mark. We can't hear you, I guess. No lag. Okay, no problem, don't worry. So yeah, following with the last meeting, is there something that you would like to better understand, something that you think we can improve on the process? It's mostly on the process, like the current documentation or how to improve documentation, how to help, how to contribute. I mean, I'm happy to hear questions and answer as possible.
It might be helpful to know who's working on what. Maybe there's already a place for that I haven't discovered yet. But when I started playing with the code generation stuff, I had heard from a colleague that Jonathan, you had also done some stuff with code generation, and did another little project off on the side with it. So, you know, I don't want to be duplicating effort there. So, you know, I guess, I don't know, maybe just one page somewhere that just says, this is what we're working on, and this is what we've done. And
yeah, theoretically, we're using SendHub, right, for that. I think you are invited to SendHub.
Oh yeah, that's right. You did invite me. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah.
Yeah, we're using. No problem. Theoretically, we're using this as like Trello. It's very similar to Trello, right? To keep track and to basically to communicate to others what we're doing.
Okay, well that answers it then. Never mind.
But this is, you know, it's been happening lately that since not many people were actually using it, I stopped using it myself as well. And honestly, I don't know how it is. Probably we should be more structured in that, starting from me, right? Like I should be always communicating there in the issues. These are actually, like, for those who don't know, SendHub is it's like a nice UI for GitHub issues in the end, because it's not just a UI; it provides more features, like a Kanban board, right? So you can see which issue is in progress, in review, or you know, backlog, or all these things. Something you cannot see in GitHub. And yeah, most of the times I try to when I go there, I try to leave a comment in the issue saying, "Hey, I'm picking this one," or assigning. But I understand that sometimes people just join the project, or it's their first contribution, so they cannot access to SendHub, and they cannot assign issues to themselves because they are not part of the organization. So sometimes leaving a small comment on the issue should be sufficient. But yeah, I think we should strongly improve the collaboration in around SendHub, or probably explore GitHub projects. I don't know. So maybe in GitHub projects, people are more likely to use it, right, or to collaborate there, because they don't need invitations for SendHub or a separate thing. Cool. Anything else you want to cover? No?
Not me.
So yeah, again, for those who don't know, Jonathan and I will be speaking at in London the 20th, May the 20th, right? If I'm not mistaken. In the Gartner AADI. What does it mean? It's application architecture and what else?
Something development and integration, or there's integration that is the I, but yeah.
Yeah, so we will be kind of announcing, let's say, version 2 release candidate there, even though this video is public, but as you can imagine, almost nobody watch it, so so this is fine to say it here. There will be no surprise for some people, but I hope that for many it will be. And yeah, so if you're gonna be around, just join us. If not, just please support us, retweeting, or you know, or sharing it on Facebook or whatever, so we can get the best marketing we can with our budget. That would be amazing. Cool. Anything else? I think we're done. Cool. Let me just stop recording.